Hello and welcome to the VRSLGI setup script tutorial. This tutorial is a mirror of the VRSLGI setup script wiki page on VRSLGI shader pack wiki. This tutorial is going to go over what the GI setup script does, as well as showing how it relates to VRSL fixtures and the like. So let's get right into it. We're going to start from the exact same scene as we did before. We're just going to go look at the GI setup script itself. So some key things about the VRSL GI setup script. The GI setup script is how you actually defined individual GI points in the VRSL GI system. They all need to be binded to a target DMX light script from the VR stage lighting package, which is this script here. It's usually good practice to just place it on the same exact game object as the DMX static script itself, and bind it that way. You can, if you can't find it, if you have trouble finding it or binding it, you can click this button and it'll attempt to find this script on the same game object or in a parent game object. But yeah, it is a requirement that even if this isn't actually doing anything or isn't binded to any actual DMX fixtures or materials, it still needs it to get certain information, such as its position and things of that nature. That being said, we can continue on. The next thing it needs is, of course, a reference to the GI manager. This auto, if you can't find it, this also gets auto-populated on your from your manager when it clicks Get All GI Lights. Go back, see now it's repopulated itself. I think it's this one. Yeah, they both repopulated themselves. Okay, let's go into the different features in script. So the first thing I want to go over before we do anything else is to mention that there are 4 types of these setup scripts, and they are defined in the light type section here. There is the fixture types, which comprise of the first 4 here, and these simply are regular VRSL fixtures. It's one GI point per fixture, and the GI point simply just matches the input of those fixtures, DMX fixtures to the best of its abilities. And that would describe these 4 here. The second type is the function type, which instead of grabbing data from a DMX fixture, it will grab data from the VRSLGI function script, which all grabs its data from a mesh material that has a _color property that you can control. We will make a separate tutorial explaining that entire system, but basically it allows you to control the GI point's color and intensity with animations and scripts rather than with DMX. The third type is DMX mixture, and what that does, instead of having only one light influence the intensity and color of a GI point, you can have up to 7 lights influence it, and those 7 lights can be of all different types and different channels and universes. This is useful if you have multiple lights in the same area that don't move, so static lights, or if you have some mover lights that are kind of tucked away in a corner or very far away. You can use this system to have them all kind of blend the same area so that they all kind of influence the same area without wasting a bunch of GI points. As I stated before, there is a default soft cap of 32 lights and a hard maximum of 64 lights, and having more of these on is also costly, so you want to keep that number down as much as possible. So using these mixture channels is a good way to reduce the number of GI points you're actually using for all your fixtures. The last type is a render texture type. This render texture type, what it does is that it actually, instead of sampling from a DMX fixture or a mesh material, it actually samples from a specific texture in the light texture itself. So in this texture here, you can see there's render texture for sampling. If you give this setup script pixel coordinates, so 0, 0 is the, with, you know, 0, 0 being the bottom left, 0, 1 would be the next pixel over, 0, 2 would be 2 pixels to the right, or 2 pixels up, I believe, because it's X, Y. You can then sample from a render texture. The default texture is just this example sampling texture from the VR stage lighting package, but you could drop in, like, say, a video file, for example, or some sort of custom render texture and drop it in there, and then have your GI point sample a pixel from that and tint it that way. I will go over all these different light types later, but for now we're just going to focus specifically more on the GI setup script itself. So, when I've got that out the way, let's just start actually going into the script itself. So, the first thing is the is-enabled toggle. As I stated, this actually stops not only stops rendering, but stops having a cost on GI enabled materials and projectors. So if you wanted to completely disable a light, this would be the toggle you would want to use, and you can turn this off to stop it from rendering. And it's good if you like going to a different room or going to a different stage that has a different set of lights. You can control it with the script. This GI manager index, this just is the index in the GI manager itself of this light. So this is at GI manager index 0. So this is the first light that's listed in the manager script. See, it references that exact same light. This is useful if you want to know where in the array on the manager script this light is located, if you wanted to do something scripting wise for the manager. Next two are the DMX channel and universes grabbed from this script above. This is the intensity. You see it kind of works similar to that of a point light intensity. So if I increase it, it gets brighter. Decrease it, it gets darker. You can make it very bright. You can go over 1. It doesn't have to be 1. You can go any number you want, really. Default, I like it at 0.75 for these kind of lights. And then you got your light range. This is a 13 plus channel with cone width, so you actually split the range into 2 sliders. This is the range. Range in these point light skins are actually inverted, so the smaller the value, the bigger the range. The bigger the value, the smaller the range. And these values these two are split to show how the cone width actually affects the light. Normally, it's just one value here, which you can set like this. You can see a little bit more closer what it does. See, as you get smaller and smaller, it gets wider and wider to the point where it just covers the whole entire map. And then you can make it smaller, and the range gets dimmer and dimmer and smaller. 1 is a good, like, nice default. But for cone width, for 13 channel spotlights, since they have a cone width property, I like to use the cone width one. Because if you go into play mode, you can actually see how it affects it. We might need to make it a bit more dramatic so it's a bit more obvious. But if I make the narrow beam like really small, the wide beam really wide, then I go and control the actual cone width channel here. Oh, come on. Oh, whoops, I hit a button. Yeah. You can see if you go with the cone width channel here, as the beam gets narrower, the range gets smaller. But if I widen the beam, the range actually gets wider. And this is like nice to convey different kinds of lighting scenarios and kind of adds a bit more realism to it. So get out of play mode. We can continue going. Here's the light types as I was describing earlier. Yeah, we'll keep going over that. And the next thing is the shadow mask. Now, each GI point, so shadow masks are interesting in that each GI point can be assigned a specific shadow mask as well as a specific channel for that shadow mask. By default, they're off, but if you can see, you can choose between 3 different masks, mask 1, 2, and 3. These masks coincide with the masks on VRSLGI enabled shaders. So here we have shadow mask 1, 2, and 3. If we were to enable shadow mask 1, we would be able to, this light would be affected by whatever is in this, whatever texture is in here and whatever UV set is on there. But you can also choose what channel it's sampling from. So by default, the channel it's sampled from is from the red channel, but you can also use red, green, you can use green, blue, or the alpha channel. Assuming that your shader is set up to support that. By default, it only supports the red channel, but you can enable more channels using this drop down here. Not all GI enabled shaders is going to support all shadow masks and all channels, so do be mindful of that. If it can't find a shadow mask that it's looking for, it just won't be sampled and it'll just work as if there had no shadow mask at all. Okay, let's move on. So we have this toggle here called use pan. So by default, 13 channel fixtures that are movers will have this pan functionality. You can actually disable that functionality and it will prevent the light from being able to pan. Same thing for the tilt. So if you don't want it to move, you can toggle these off. You can see here, if I move this light here, you can see it's following the actual relative position of this light. And if I disable the pan here, see that it gets reset here. And if I go to tilt, it will completely reset altogether, completely turn off. Now, you can also use the pan amount feature here. This actually is more of a linear progression, so you can kind of make the light follow the actual VRSL spotlight, but not 100%. So if you only want it to move 50% of the way, you can set it to like 0.5. Now only 50% of the movement actually is influenced. So now if I move it around, you can see it's not moving entirely with it. I like to use it for tilt, so I like to have 100% on pan and maybe like 50% on tilt. That way it's not like completely going all the way up. I think that looks pretty nice. We can also just set it to 0 and it won't move at all. And then it just won't move at all. As you can see, it just stays in one place. Color is still influenced, but it just doesn't move. Yeah. And this data here is all just data from this channel here. See, here's like invert pan, invert tilt, invert pan, invert tilt. It just grabs that same information from the DMX static script that it's referencing. Now this offset here, this is where the light's starting position is at the 0, position. So if we move this light to be straight up and down, so this is where there's no pan and no tilt, this is where the GI point actually starts. These GI points are more like actual point lights that follow the light around to give off a global illumination effect, and you can set where these GI points are actually existing at. Like I said, by default it's right about there, and you can set the offset based relative on the root of the fixture. So if I go to 0, you can see that square moves into all the way to the base of the fixture, and now the GI point is at the base of the fixture. We don't want that. We kind of want it to be a little bit further away. I like it right about here, but you can move it anywhere you want. You can move it to forward and back, left and right. You know, just kind of move it wherever you want to move it. And there's always a visual guide, so you actually know where it is relative to your fixture. But for movers, I like to keep it just a little bit down, about right there. You can get it super close, but of course the closer you get it, the higher chance it is of it clipping, so you do need to realize that. So if I were to move it like 8, you can see now it's under the floor and it's not emitting any light because it's under the floor. So yeah, use that and move the offset to wherever you think might look good. A little bit further away from light tends to look best since the actual origin of the light ends up being here, and it kind of creates this nice illusion effect. Another thing is this update light function here. So as you've been seeing here, when you click a button, it does actually update it automatically, but sometimes that might not happen, and then you can hit this button, which will force all this data to actually update in the texture in real time. This is just like a if things are going wrong. You can also hit this button here, force update GI texture, and it does relatively the same thing. And here's that same data as I stated before from the manager, but here directly on the setup script. You can see like here is the actual channel. This is the raw. I believe this is the raw DMX channel. This is the actual DMX channel. So if I were to like change this channel to say channel 27, you'll see that if I update the light, see that's where that's nice and useful. If it doesn't update, you can see now it's on 27. So now this light is reacting to channel 27, which is, I believe, this one here. So I can make it now. Let's make it red. There, now this light is red, because it's reading from channel 27. And if I switch it back to channel 14, it'll be green, and you'll want to hit update. Now it's green. And that pretty much goes over the entire setup script. As I stated before, the light types I'll actually go over in a separate video because there's a lot to them, and it can change how this setup script really works, as well as like some of these different settings might not end up working, like the pan tilt functions. They only work with the 13 channel and 13 channel cone width features. Anyway, thanks for watching. I'll see you later.